Hello everybody and welcome to today's Industry Dynamics webinar. My name is Louise and I'll be moderating today's event. Our topic today is Beyond Reporting, Empowering the Agile Supply Chain through Cross-Process Control Towers. And our presenter today is Sean Cooley, Business Transformation Expert. I'll now turn over to Sean. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you, Industry Dynamics and Every Angle for inviting me to do this webinar today. I think I'll just very briefly start, if I may, with a question that should be on most people's lips if they don't know who I am, which is who I am and why it's worth 30 minutes of their time listening to me. A little bit of background, I won't spend too long on this, but basically I'm a member of the European leadership team of the APIC Supply Chain Council, which I have been for 2007. So that's a volunteer role where I help companies around the world to understand how to use supply chain practices and use things like the SCORE model in order to transform, their business performance. I'm obviously SCORE Professional Certified, one of the handful of certified SCORE trainers globally. Also a member of the Fellow of Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. And I think the materials we're going to go through today is really sort of drawing upon my sort of 20+ years of strategic operations supply chain experience, and specifically working with ERP systems such as SAP in Europe, Africa, Australia, and across the US. And I've worked in a number of different industries such as FMCG, CPG, A&D, etc. For nearly a decade, I was the global design authority in what was the world's largest SAP implementation at that point in time. And this is kind of really what got me into some of the topics that we're going to talk about today, which was, we had spent a large amount of time developing world-class processes, training these out worldwide on what was the world's leading ERP software. We pushed it to almost a point of bleeding edge. Yet, regardless of where we were in the world, we still bumped into the same sort of change management issues and siloized thinking that caused problems and prevented us from sort of achieving the goals of the project. And one of my big challenges was to learn sort of lessons of that implementation and roll out across the world and see how can we do it better and how can we stop it being such a painful exercise. That led me to spend 6 years as a CEO and founder of a boutique consultancy, specifically working on companies that had implemented ERP systems such as SAP. I took a number of the people with me from the FMCG I worked for, and more recently I've spent time advising CEOs on how to align the value chain. So how to bring different areas of the business together in order to deliver strategic outcomes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. If you go onto my website, or if you go onto anything like the World Financial Review or the European Business Review, you'll see a number of articles on there. There's one particular one at the moment, which is a cover article for the European Business Review on Amazon and how they're aligning all of their technological innovations together in order to automate the international supply chain, which I think maybe some of the listeners might be interested in. And finally, for my paid work, I help consultancies transport from good to great. What really gets me out of bed in the morning, however, is trying to understand how to bring together all of the different lessons from thought leaders and from management gurus and from best practices and from methodologies such as lean, and actually bring them together in order to help companies successfully transform and to break through sort of cultural barriers. And I'd like to touch on some of that today, specifically around metrics and reporting. So I'll start with a question. Imagine that the air traffic control team who run an airport basically control the airspace around that based only looking at the planes that had already landed, rather than looking at the position, the altitude and the speed of the planes that were currently in the air. Imagine if the airport had a separate control tower to manage planes that were taking off, another control tower that handled planes that were landing, another one for gate allocation, another one for fuel supply, another one for luggage movement. So we had a separate control tower handling each one, and they didn't talk to each other, and they didn't communicate only when things went wrong, and usually it was a blame discussion. I'm pretty much sure it'd be chaos, and most people wouldn't use it. Flights would be cancelled. People would be queuing, luggage would pile up, there would be frustration, and probably a few near misses in the air. So given that we won't use that, why is it that we run most of our businesses in the same way? Why is it that we have our own functional silos who generally don't talk to each other, generally have their own measures of success, operate independently, and yet we expect things to get out the door and to our customers on time, in full, perfectly, despite the fact that we are often working at odds with each other? Now, the 5 most common supply chain management challenges when we look at businesses is, the first one is that they're unable to apply the right metrics to manage the supply chain effectively. And I see this again and again and again throughout the companies that I help around the world. They either don't know what to measure or they try to measure everything. And that makes it very difficult to prioritize where they should improve, where they should apply focus. Most of the measures that they look at are lag-based. They are based on the planes that have landed, so to speak. They are looking at sales history, sales performance, supply chain performance, customer service metrics that have already happened rather than what's actually going on right now, which is increasingly difficult in this sort of dynamic, demand-driven world that we live in with omni-channel demand signals coming into the business. As we've expanded, the complexity of supply chains has increased dramatically, and that means the talent we need is getting harder and harder to find and even harder to retain, specifically if we have very hierarchical organizational structures. The new millennial workers that we expect to run these, they aren't in it for life in the same way that maybe I or some of my even elder colleagues used to be, where we go into an organization and expect to stay there for 20, 30 years. It's just not the mindset anymore. Give me 1 second, I'm just having trouble getting this to move forward. Now, this functional strategic misalignment starts at the top, and it starts with the boardroom really, because we have different measures of success from the different directors. And in order to try and move the business forward, we have, for example, purchasing and operations. They would be able to say, well, we can actually, we can do our bit for the business if we buy bulk from offshore, if we use low-cost labor, if we maximize our utilization, if we ship full trucks, then we can bring down the operation and purchasing costs. Sales team said, well, if we can deliver more frequently, if we can accept smaller quantities by creating more products, if we do more promotions, then that actually will help us with our sales perspective. And then we've got our financial teams and our inventory management team said, well, if we reduce inventories, we outsource logistics, if I defer capital investments, then that will help us with our P&L and our balance sheets. And these are dynamic tensions in the organization that are pulling the business in multiple different directions. And I always remember one particular conversation where the CEO of an organization asked me to come in and sit at the boardroom and listen basically to the different directors to try and figure out what was really going on as he had his monthly board meeting. And basically he asked the different departmental heads to go around the table, tell me how they were doing. Everyone went round, every department went round and basically said, I've hit my numbers. Went round sales, I've hit my numbers. Went down supply chain, yep, hit my numbers. And when it came back to him, he said, well, that's fantastic. Apparently everyone's hit their numbers apart from me. So how does that work? If every department has hit the numbers that they were actually targeted on, but the business itself is failing, what's really going on there? And this is a bit down to a strategic misalignment of measures. So as an example, I'm going to use the APIC Supply Chain Council score model here a little bit. If we have customers and we assume that customers want different things and they all come into this business, and this business got plenty of I-shaped people all being measured on their own independent metrics. And at the top we have the CEO trying to basically hang things together. He's trying to look at the business as a whole, whereas each one of these people are running their own departments independently. And our customers come in, some want reliable supply, some want quick, some want low cost, some want innovative products. They all want different things, but it all goes into the same processes. It all goes in and be measured the same way. So we have a one-size-fits-all model. And each one of those departments, again, basically says, look, I can do my bit, I can help. You want me to hit targets? Well, in my sales perspective, if I had more choice, if I had shorter lead times, if I had more innovation, I could sell more. The deliver guy said, well, if you brought my range down, I'm going to be more consistent demand. We can fill our trucks a little bit more efficiently. I can pick better. manufacturing teams, they said, well, yeah, a lot less complexity. If we standardized our product range, if we had longer run times, then I can be more efficient because that's what I'm measured on. There's the guys in procurement basically saying, we can bring the cost down. That's how I'm measured. I can bring the cost down if I have cheaper suppliers. They go out to cheaper suppliers, probably in the Far East. Those suppliers says, yeah, we can do cheap price for you, but you need to buy in bigger volumes and there's long lead times there. And all at the bottom there, we have the finance teams and we're basically saying, yeah, can you do all of that, please, but with less working capital and reduction in costs? Now, it's immediate. And when you look at the business like this, it says how each department could potentially succeed, but the business itself fails. And I'm sure some of the people on the other end of this webinar have been in situations where if you actually sat back and lined up the different measures of success across the different processes in the value chain, you would see something very similar to this, because it's been the case in every business that I've met. And this was a problem. So I call this the doom loop of disengagement. Where there's an unclear purpose and strategy, what we end up with is a one-size-fits-all kind of supply chain. And that in itself creates a load of bureaucratic and misaligned rules, procedures, systems, and processes. Because of that, there's a lack of ownership and accountability for the outcome of the value chain. Each people own and are accountable for certain activities, but no one's accountable for the outcome. Who's responsible for customer service? Who's responsible for inventory? No, either everyone is or no one is. That ends up with a collection of multiple misaligned measures and targets. And because of that, people are not clear about how they themselves are supposed to contribute to the success of the business, and they're also not clear about how other people are acting. And what we end up with is a lot of frustrated talent, people who maybe come from different businesses who think it doesn't need to be this complicated, and also a lot of low trust between departments. And when we have low trust, it affects two economic factors. Things take a lot longer and they cost a lot more. A lot of this alignment is mostly self-imposed. So here's some examples of just some feedback when I've been helping companies. I tend to ask a number of sort of questions of the organization, usually at sort of multiple levels, from the executives down to sort of operator level. And this particular example from this particular company is just a great one because it just summarizes it all very clearly. We saw the biggest issue here. When I asked the question, what stops goals being achieved, you can see that the main issue is the ability to execute effectively. So people are struggling with the concept of execution. And then if you look at the secondary and tertiary reasons that are given, that explains why the ability to execute effectively is a problem. So there's a lack of clarity around goals and strategy. The culture gets in the way. What do we mean by culture? Well, culture is simply the way we do things around here. And when people say their culture is stopping things from being organized effectively or being executed effectively, what they're really saying is the way we do things around here stop us from doing things around here. Culture and the lack of clarity in goals and strategies probably leading to the poor communication being an issue. People are being blamed. Well, what do they mean when they say people? Are they saying there's not enough skills here, or are they more likely saying we work against each other? Processes and systems are also mentioned. So I asked some other questions. I asked, do you think there's a clear strategy to deliver the goals? And what you can see here is that 13 people said nope, and 4 said yes. It might not surprise you to know that the 4 who said yes were the 4 people I mentioned from the C-suite. Then the second interesting question was, I said, would you think that others would know what the strategy is? Now, one person here said, well, I hope they did, and the rest of the people said no. So even though the people said there was a clear strategy to deliver the goals, they don't believe any other people would know what that clear strategy actually is. And then I asked, are the right things measured? And you can see the majority of people said no, a few of them said yes, and some said yes and no, which really kind of means no. And finally, I asked, do you feel that the business is joined up end to end? And unanimously, from the C-suite to the operators, everyone said no. And the reason I use this particular example is it's absolutely atypical of every business I've bumped into, regardless of the continent, regardless of the industry sector, when they have a sort of functional silo mindset. And what businesses tend to do is they tend to then measure everything and then average on the results. So on average, everything's okay. But if I take this example here where there's 7 different supply chains in this business, and I'm pretty guaranteed that a business wouldn't measure itself in 7 different supply chains, it probably just says, on average, our service level is 93.7%, perfect order fulfillment, our lead times are 6.57 days, our cost of goods sold is 22%, and our days of inventory is 21. But as you see, across the different supply chains, these numbers vary wildly. And actually what I've found uniformly in all companies that I've done any transformation projects is when they actually break it down to supply chain level or to value chain level, and they actually define what the strategy should be for that value chain, and they define what the metrics should be to enable them to know whether or not they're delivering that strategy, they find out that they're serving that area worst. So for example, if I use this as an example, you'll probably find at supply chain number 5, reliability is key. The customer there would value reliability where goods are delivered on time, in full, perfect quality, perfect documentation, but it's getting the worst service. Again, this happens time and time again. When we break it down to detail level, we find out we're generally serving the customers we value the most, the worst. But because it's just averaged up, it's not so. A great guy called Jonathan J.L. Byrne did a really good piece of work, and he wrote it into a book called Islands of Profit in the Sea of Red Ink. And he basically said, by any measure, 30 to 40% of any business is deeply unprofitable. But it's hidden. That 30 to 40% is hidden by the 10 to 20% that's highly profitable. And also, on average, everything looks like it's doing quite well, or just doing okay. And because things are okay, no one sees a sort of burning platform to change. And what we find that actually what businesses do is they then tend to provide reporting rather than control towers, so they have lots of lag measures. So across the different processes here at the bottom, you can see they then spend a lot of effort trying to find out what's actually going on, either by downloading into Excel or into Access, or if you're on SAP, doing some apps, in order to get down some information, and in order to find out what's going on between the cracks from one functional silo to the other. There's loads of meetings, unproductive meetings, they spend loads of time manipulating the data, lots of overtime in order to handle the expedites and the rush orders. You find there's multiple versions of the truth, lots of firefighting, and people are constantly status reporting and trying to reconcile data between different data sets or different spreadsheets, and it's just complete wasted effort. And this, of course, wastes money. Because things are not in control and people don't understand why they're not in control, there's multiple shipments, loads of different back orders, frustrated employees, penalties, lost sales, obsolete stocks, excess stocks, short-dated stocks, order expediting. All of this stuff costs money. Every time you touch inventory, it costs money. Every time you partially ship, it costs money. Every time you write stock off, it costs money. Every time you do overtime, it costs money. So you collect all of that together, and it's cost the business an enormous amount of cash. But it just gets wrapped into, this is the way we do business around here. This is just the cost of doing business. And it has an impact on employees. So all of this firefighting causes a complete lack of focus, which means people don't have any time to learn or adapt to what's actually going on. That becomes quite frustrating because there's no real sense of progress. It's kind of like every day is Groundhog Day, which leads to a lack of personal fulfillment, frustration, and disengagement. Here's an example of 3 different word clouds from 3 different companies where I just asked very simply, after gaining the trust of the people, give me 3 words that tell me what it's like to work around here. And as you can see, there's a number of different words that come up based on the sort of the level of satisfaction in the organization, but the word that creeps up again and again and again is frustrated. Now, frustrated is not a bad word. It's not like saying they're suicidal or they're disillusioned. Frustrated means, maybe I quite enjoy working around here. I quite enjoy my colleagues. I believe in the company. I believe in what we're trying to achieve, but it's just so frustrating. It's frustrating because we're not working together as well as we could. I'm not getting the information that I need in order to make good decisions. It's just frustrating. I think there's a better way. In order to gain some form of insight into what's going on, IT departments try to help, because that's their job. And what they've done is they've either built a business warehouse, which can be particularly time consuming, it's relatively inflexible, chaining changes to it are expensive. The IT team then becomes a bottleneck. You have to create a functional spec. The functional spec has to go off to IT. They have to review it. They have to look at the cube structure, look at the characteristic combinations, users are constrained to certain cubes. So it's relatively expensive and unwieldy. And most times, users don't really know what it is they want until you give them what they asked for. So there's a lot of rework going on there. Or maybe they invest in data visualization tools, and there's a lot of these about, but they still require significant data staging and curation. It's not a plug-and-play solution. IT needs to build and manage the data set. It doesn't generally understand any of the configuration. It just extracts and presents data. So if you've got an SAP system, for example, it doesn't understand all the T tables and all the configuration tables, which means there's a lack of insight. It's not able to do much with the data other than visualize it and present it and allow you to report it. And basically, each solution ends up being magical. So you've got lots of software vendors who are promising unicorns and rainbows from their software solution. But actually what you find out is when you actually start to implement it, there's a lot of work involved in implementing these. There's a lot of data that needs to be managed. There's a lot of data that needs to be cleaned. There's a lot of data that needs to be curated. So, I think it's more like rather than a unicorn, it's more like a plow horse. And in fact, once you start to load this work on it, you find your magical unicorn ends up a bit like this ass with its legs dangling in the air, completely unable to move the business forward. Not good. So why is understanding so difficult? And why is foresight so hard to achieve in businesses? Good question. Well, it's because we're dealing in a world of exponential complexity. To start off with, business models have now become very complicated. So companies are constantly trying to refine their value proposition, define the value proposition to certain customer segments, and align the capabilities in order to do that. And between that, you need a clear strategy. Now, we've already defined that having a clear strategy is a problem for many businesses. We've got an increasing number of channels that need to deal with. So before, it used to be just one way of dealing with customers. Now we're in an omni-channel world. The network, the supply chain itself is now completely global and very complicated. We're dealing with suppliers in different continents. We're dealing in distribution centers in different countries. It's now dealing with a whole host of different partners and 3PLs. So the supply chain is exponentially more complicated. And the control structure, the hierarchy now, the business hierarchy, where it all used to be in one office in one place, it's not anymore. It's becoming increasingly more difficult. So we've got an exponential level of complexity. And any kind of reporting tool basically needs to understand all that complexity, and most of them don't. And systems themselves, the systems to manage this complexity, are also themselves very complex. So if I take the object models, I'll use SAP as an example. So if I just not even concentrate with the thousands upon thousands of tables, but just group them together into object models, if I look at the order to cash tables, we've got a large number of different tables that go down to schedule line level. We've got tables in procurement that do the same. We've got the supply to demand tables. MRP tries to string it all together. We've then got all of our finance and reporting tables. And then we want to do some sort of supply chain forecasting as well. And we've got exponential level of complexity. Sorry, my last button's not working there. So the whole thing is completely complex. And managing that requires a huge degree of sophistication, more than a data visualization tool can handle, and more than a cube can handle. So we need to think differently. We need to be a bit like this badass seagull, and we need to challenge a few status quos. So in this increasing complex global environment, we basically need to do more than just report on landed planes. We need to understand the interrelationships of the planes in the air and the impact on the planes not yet taken off, so all of our connecting flights. We need to understand the impact on luggage, on passengers, on all of the different elements. Now, if I just transpose planes for sales orders and luggage for data and people for purchase orders, it's bringing together an understanding of purchasing, manufacturing, and also the order processes, in order to understand if I have a late purchase order, I need the items on that purchase order contained in a bill of material that's on a production works order that's a link to a sales order that means if this is late, one particular finished product is not going to be delivered. So that's kind of the level of complexity that we actually need to have, the level of understanding that we need to have in order to be able to win in this demand-driven world. Because we need to move forward from simple reporting, which is basically telling us what's just happened, into a degree of insight, which is telling us what's happening and potentially why, so that we can actually start to take action on that insight, so actionable insight. We need to be able to know that we can take different actions in order to prevent the impact of the issue hitting the customer, because at the end of the day, it's the customer that brings employment. Now, the key thing here is you can't control what you don't understand. And there should be a graph at the side here, which hasn't appeared. Apologies for that. But ultimately, we need to understand what's causing all of the disruptions. So what's causing the data integrity issues? What's causing the human errors? Why aren't we hitting the schedule on time? Why are processes not being conformed to? We need to understand all of these. And we need to understand that. See if I can bring that back. Sorry, guys. So that we can actually control service, control inventory, and then once we understand control, we can then start to improve. Once we improve things, and on continuous improvement, we find that we can take all the wasted cash from all of the activities that we did that weren't value added and redirect that to more innovative things, to creating more innovative value propositions that help to delight our customers. And the key to this is to break this one-size-fits-all model, to stop seeing the business as one entity and to break it down into value chains, to understand that different customers bring different levels of value. So different customers value different things. Each value chain contains a different mix of products, markets, and customers. Each customer values different things. Each customer brings itself different levels of value, and that's very hard for some organizations who are just in reporting tools to be able to understand what those different levels of value are. So the key is to be able to understand what customers you want and what they value most, and then design the end-to-end value chain specifically to deliver that value. So the whole of the value chain activities are joined up to be measured in a way that improves the outcome at the end. So working from the customer back. Now, some ways companies are doing this is they're starting to learn from software organizations. So developing principles like Agile and Scrum, and actually saying this is not just for software. And the software industry has used these techniques in order to get products out the door, to have software products out the door incredibly quickly, and to break away from the sort of waterfall planning model. Now, I've used this with a number of different organizations, and it doesn't just apply to software. It's really about bringing elements of the processes, to bring representations of the processes across the value chain together in order to basically understand how they should be working together in order to improve the outcome. And the outcome should be defined by the strategy. So the measures have become defined internally and saying these are the way we believe we should be measured in order to improve the outcome. And what we're talking about here is creating what you may have heard before, which is called T-shaped people. So these are people who are not only good at their own particular function, but they operate with full understanding of the processes downstream of them and know how to act to help the processes that are upstream. And that requires them to define their contribution. And in that contribution, there is taking responsibility to tasks that might not benefit themselves, might not benefit their department, but ultimately benefits the value chain as a whole. So it's a completely new way of thinking. And this has to become cultural. And the best way to do this is by basically starting small, thinking big, then starting small, then when you get the process ready, start to scale that relatively quickly. Why segment into value chain teams? Well, because it brings a small amount of people together on the same page. And the team size should be what Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, says is big enough to be fed by 2 pizzas. So it should never be bigger than, you could be able to feed by just 2 large pizzas. So we're looking between sort of 7 plus or minus 2, really, as being the optimal, having a key representation of each process across the value chain. And what this means is because they're all on the same page, it gets rid of these miscommunications, misaligned priorities, or key metrics that basically are causing this dynamic tension and pulling people in different ways. It enables people to focus, They focus on a reduced number of accounts because they're just focusing on the value chain. They don't have a one-size-fits-all model. There is buckets of empirical evidence that says smaller teams work much better together. This is why small entrepreneurial teams can achieve great things, and then when they start to overlay layers and layers of management, progress seems to grind to a halt. And finally, clarity. It creates clarity of the strategy, of the measures, of any promotions or priorities or lead time issues. Everyone gets to see the problem at the same time. And they're also very clear about what the value proposition is they're trying to deliver and the different related value packages. So basically, to bring it together in a very short terminology, everyone's on the same page. Everyone's clear about the strategy. Everyone's clear about each other's roles, and everyone's trying to do their bit to help move it forward. Now, in order to do that, of course, they need information. And they need to be able to focus on not just being efficient in their activities, but they need to be effective in the delivery of outcomes. And this is a key difference. So, they need to work on improving value chain outcomes. So, be that improving customer service, decreasing lead times, reducing costs, optimizing inventory, eliminating waste. This is the focus of the value chain. Then they need to control the processes involved in doing that, from being able to understand the planes in the air, so the open orders, the open purchase orders, work orders, or sales orders, understand all the supply processes, all the supply performance, operations, inventory, compliance, and risk controls. It's not just good enough to have, an optimized process. You also need to have compliant processes. And of course, this key bit at the moment here is all about data management, data conformance. And therefore, they also need tools that help them to understand the issues as and when they happen. So root causes of issues, what critical orders, bottlenecks, shortages, unneeded stocks, any delays. Receive that information in a time frame that enables them to do something about it and affect the orders that are impacted by this, not just simply report on poor service that happened yesterday or last week or the previous month. So what we're doing here is providing a tool that both allows us to measure what's happened, analyze what's happening right now, the planes in the air, and act on any discrepancies or outliers as and when they happen. So here's an example. Let's assume that we have a reliable value chain. So we've got a team of people who are working together in order to improve the reliability. And in order to do that, we need reliable planning, we need reliable sourcing, we need reliable making, manufacturing, and we need reliable delivery. Each one has an aligned metric, so from forecast error to supplier OTIF all the way through to sales order OTIF. But there's been some issues. We see that the issue lies in the sourcing area. But the next question is, I need to know not just that the supplier, we've got supply delays, but are we getting supply delays by vendor? So is it the same vendor again and again and again? Is it by buyer? So maybe I have a training issue, or is it by material? So we need to be able to break the metrics down by those. So that causes us to take different actions. We're either addressing the supply performance, and here we're addressing process conformance, and there we're addressing data conformance. So there's a mix of performance-related issues and conformance-related issues. We may wish to incentivize or collaborate or even change the supplier. It depends on how many times we've had an issue with him. With the buyer, we want to rectify the issue, educate them onto the process. Maybe they missed a training course. And if they continually do it, then obviously we can take more disciplinary action. The same with materials. Again, rectify the data issue, educate people how to manage data better, and just ensure we have clear roles and responsibilities. And if they keep doing it, then we also need to take action. But we're getting down to root cause and not just looking at the symptoms. Now, control requires us basically to have immediate answers to real-time questions across multiple different areas. So in order to join the value chain up, we need to have a tool that allows us to say, what's the likely service level of open orders? So not what was the service level, but of the orders that have just come in, where have we got issues and why? What's causing back orders? Which purchase orders are going to affect customer service if they're late? Are we buying things we don't need? Can we delay any purchases? Are we buying stuff that's just ultimately going to sit in inventory? Do we have any bottlenecks affect our ability to supply current and future demand? Do we have enough incoming supply? Will our assets be operational when we need them? How much money is being lost to misallocated discounts? This level of control is what we're after, to be able to answer these key questions. And as I mentioned earlier, talent is an important one. So we need to know, are we retaining our best people? Do we have enough resource coverage? How accurate is our master and transactional data? Are we exposed? We need systems that enable us to answer those questions. Because by answering those questions, we were able to control. Understanding brings control. And the reverse is true. You cannot control what you do not understand. So by being able to answer those questions, we're able to ensure that we control customer service, we control supply performance, we are able to manage and optimize our cost to serve, we can optimize our inventory or our cash flow, maybe our cash-to-cash cycle time is something we want to get control of. We can utilize our assets, improve productivity of employees and engagement of employees, etc., etc. That has a top-line impact and a bottom-line impact. So by doing that, and this is like an upside-down sort of DuPont diagram, we're able to ensure that we drive up revenue by making sure we deliver right first time, which cuts down the number of partial shipments, we reduce our expenses, we get more return from our working capital, our fixed capital, our human capital, our reporting and accuracy goes up. That removes all of the wasted effort in downloading data and trying to reconcile spreadsheets, and we're able to control our levels of risk, which drives economic and shareholder value. So there's real economic value in this. And the key is you are able to have it all. You are able to create a bimodal strategy. As long as you can break things into these different value chains, you are able to say, well, how can we understand and control what's going on right now? And through doing that, we're able to use tools to help us have the information, the insight, and our fingertips to see innovative opportunities and to ensure that we deliver the correct value propositions. But you have to have understanding and control. So the reason why so many people are getting frustrated in business is that they have no lack of strategy. There's consultancies around the world who are good at strategy. People understand strategy. But it's being able to drive that strategy down to the operational layer and provide them with insights as to what's going on right now and whether or not we are helping as a unit, as a team, to deliver that strategy. So basically, in the 35 minutes I have with your time, what I'm proposing is that you start to look at your organization, segment your data into value chains, understand what the different value propositions are. How do you actually measure them? What should the strategy be? Should it be reliability or responsiveness? Should it be low cost? Are these commodity items? Is it about asset utilization? What's my strategy? We need to join up the processes, define and align the measures across the value chain, and focus on the different elements of that value chain being measured on outcomes, not just activities. But also you do need to understand that it's not just good enough to measure performance. It's not good enough to measure the landed planes. We actually need to be able to understand both process and data conformance, because this is the foundations. These are the things that allow us to build our beautiful skyscraper of a value chain, because we have to first dig down and lay some solid process conformance and data conformance measures. And we need to be able to have at our fingertips the capability to understand issues and diagnose root causes. So we need to move beyond these sort of performance measure reporting tools and basically understand what's really going on in our business right now. Okay, that's all from me. I've written with every angle the company that is sponsoring this event. They asked me to write an ebook which goes into this in a little bit more detail, called Empowering the Agile Enterprise, talking specifically about self-service analytics. I believe this is available for download and will be sent to you for all the people listening to this webinar. And with that, I'll open the floor for questions.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for that, Sean. So let's wrap things up with our Q&A session. If you do have any questions for Sean, just simply drop them into the Q&A box and we'll be able to run through those. We've already received a few questions, so let's get started. So first question, Sean. In your experience, what are the main barriers stopping companies from adopting a more agile style of organizational structure?
Ooh, good question. Almost certainly, without exception, every single time it's been people. It's been the people within the organization themselves. There is no lack of desire to do things differently, but actually when it comes down to behaving differently, when it comes down to breaking out of the sort of functional silos, a lack of leadership and a lack of sponsorship from very senior people to enable it to happen. Whenever I pull people in from sort of middle management level into a room at one time, everyone gets it, everyone understands that this will be a better way of operating. The thing that prevents it from happening is basically the culture of the organization, and unfortunately it's leadership which sets that culture. So I would say that would be the main barrier, is them themselves really. It's, it is a choice at the end of the day, but there has to be someone senior enough in the organization who is empowered to make that choice.
Okay, so thank you for that. So our next question here, what companies have successfully implemented this kind of structure?
Oh, well, I think if you took the Gartner Top 25 supply chains, which comes out every year, if you pretty much look down that list, that would give you the list of companies that have taken this sort of value chain model, and some of which have done so incredibly successfully. So one of the more familiar case studies is Zara, for example, who has carefully segmented their business. They're now known as being the most sort of devastating retail company in the world. They are the most cash-rich and the most leading retail company through segmentation. They've made some very clear strategic trade-offs. They've kept manufacturing of their fast fashion close to their headquarters in Spain. They've empowered their store managers to be able to communicate directly with design teams to say what's selling and what's not selling. And they've basically created a strategy all around almost like a lack of availability. So they've got this whole when it's gone mindset. And they've joined up the entire value chain so that they can act at speed. They don't have to ask for permission to change designs. They work together as country teams, and they were able to basically turn around a new series or new styles of fashions within 2 weeks when the industry standard is 6 months. Other companies, Amazon operates like this. It allows its team to experiment as long as it moves its virtuous cycle of low price, wide choice, and user convenience. They're empowered to do that. Unilever's very famously sort of broken its business into value chains with a sustainability strategy at its core. So if you look across any of the sort of Gartner Top 25, they're the guys that are doing it.
Okay, great, thank you. So you talked about supply chain segmentation. So it's been discussed for some time now, and I know you've written and delivered workshops on this topic a lot. Why is it still not adopted? Is it more than just classifying your customers or categorizing your suppliers?
Yeah, it is absolutely. And when I talk to companies about value chain segmentation, some of their first responses is, oh, we kind of do that. We classify our customers, we have different category managements, but they're not joined up. And it's not real segmentation, so they're not actually working from the customer back, understanding the different value propositions and working through all of the different processes involved in that. They're just segments in different functions. Why is it not adopted? I think the answer to that question, again, goes back to the answer to the first question. It comes back to people. It comes back to the ability to change in an organization and the clarity of a vision between why we would want to do this. Again, when you lay it out and you go through and breaking out of this one-size-fits-all model and you split the business down and understand different products and services that you sell and the different customers that you sell it to, it becomes very clear that different customers value different things, and the strategy for delivering that value should be different for the different value chains. But they just have one size fits all strategy, and they just have a one size fits all set of supply chain processes. And again, it goes back to who kind of owns the transformation. So the biggest challenge I find when I help companies is that you kind of need people quite senior in the organization to be involved in this change. Otherwise, it just becomes a talking point and nothing ever changes.
Okay, great. So I've got an analytics question here, actually. So what are the benefits to IT departments in providing self-service analytics? Do they not just lose control?
I think that's what they assume is going to happen. I think they assume they're going to lose control, but in fact what they're doing is they're empowering the business to answer their own questions. And as I said, I think in the presentation, most people don't know exactly what it is they want until IT gives them what they asked for. And then they realise that what they asked for wasn't what they wanted. So there's a huge amount of kind of non-value add and rework and a lot of frustration from both the IT departments, who kind of think, why doesn't the business know what it wants? but also from the business perspective, says, why does it take so long? Why do I have to wait weeks or months and look at these reports from, maybe from my offshore, IT department, etc. But from my perspective, there's actually huge value here. There's value in ensuring that customers are being satisfied. Their customers, the business users, are able to provide their own analytics and their own interrogation. If you buy the right tool, it's also ensuring that they're not downloading data into insecure and often dangerous platforms like Excel, where you end up with multiple versions of the truth flying through the business. And they're able to free up their own resources in order to, basically focus on much more value-added activities, more strategic activities, rather than just another stupid report, so to speak.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I've got enough time for one last question, actually. So what tools do you know of that can provide the level of insight you described?
Yeah, I guess, the reason why I spoke on this particular webinar was because I think I was being asked by one of the companies that does have that, EveryAngle. It's a tool that I've used a number of times with large clients in order to provide sort of empowerment or self-service analytics. It's probably one of the few that I do know, because specifically I know it just works with SAP, so it's not a tool for companies that don't have SAP. But if you do have SAP, most of the time is spent sort of trying to extract information in order to analyze it. And I know that EveryAngle, from the way I've used it, and when I came across it, I was kind of, where have you been all my life, so to speak? Because we would have saved virtually millions upon millions of pounds of wasted effort in trying to provide insight and remove the need to write a load of ABAPs and business cube, VW cubes, etc., in order to provide that level of data. I know a lot of the other products on the market, either tend to fall into sort of visualization, tools. I don't really want to name them. I guess I guess you know who they are, or the BW stuff. And I know SAP itself is trying to work on creating more sort of self-service analytic capabilities, but the key to me is really that it has to understand the data. It can't just report on the data. It has to understand the configuration. It has to understand the relationships, and it has to do more than just report. It has to transform, and identify bottlenecks and shortages, and be able to understand the interrelationships between supply and demand. And that, that's one of the things I love about EveryAngle was, I think when I came across it and I spoke to some of the team there, and they told me what it did, I've basically told them to their face that they were talking rubbish, because the complexity, as I said earlier, the level of complexity needed to be managed, this exponential level of complexity, I just don't believe any tool could do that and still function. And I was quite surprised when I came across EveryAngle many years ago now to find that it could. And again, one of the issues I've had with EveryAngle is that it's been a bit of a secret, and I don't think it really should be. So a bit of a load, that maybe feels a bit of a loaded question, but certainly the company that's asked me to speak today has been the one software product I generally recommend to people.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you for that. So some great insights there, Sean. So that concludes today's webinar session. Thank you for joining us today for our Industry Dynamics webinar session. And a big thank you to Sean for taking the time to give such a fabulous and interesting presentation. So thank you, Sean.
No problem at all. My pleasure.
Okay, thank you. So this